Welcome, learners. Today we board on an essential discussion about challenges of rural communication, overcoming barriers. This field is vital for fostering inclusive development and ensuring that every voice, especially from non urban and remote areas, is heard and engaged. We will explore the unique landscape of communicating effectively in these settings. Before we delve deeper, let's outline what we aim to achieve. By the end of this unit, dear learners, you will be able to identify key challenges in rural communication and their implications, analyze psychological and sociological influences affecting how messages are received in rural areas, understand strategies for building that all important trust and cultural relevance, explore participatory and technology enabled approaches to rural communication, and finally evaluate the ethical and contextual considerations that are paramount in any rural outreach initiative. So, what exactly do we mean by rural communication? It refers to the processes of sharing information and engaging in dialogue with communities in non urban, often remote areas. Its relevance cannot be overstated. Effective communication in rural settings is the bedrock for successful development programs, public health campaigns, and educational advancements, and even fostering social change. Consider countries like India, where a majority of the population resides in rural areas. Reaching these communities is absolutely essential for inclusive progress. As scholars emphasize, and I quote, people oriented development can only realize its full potential if rural people are involved and motivated, and if information and knowledge is shared. This highlights a fundamental point. Communication here isn't just about broadcasting messages, it's about establishing a genuine two-way dialogue, a conversation that actively involves rural people in planning and decision making processes. When done right, it empowers communities, improves the adoption of innovations, and ultimately enhances livelihoods and social outcomes. However, communicating effectively with rural audiences is not unique without its unique challenges. However, communicating effectively with rural audiences is not without its unique challenges. These are areas often characterized by limited infrastructure, such as poor road networks or erratic power supply, which also affects media reach. We encounter a rich tapestry of diverse languages and dialects, coupled with varying literacy levels, which can complicate standardized messaging. Furthermore, rural communities have distinct cultural norms and deep rooted social structures that significantly influence how information is perceived and acted upon. Building trust can be a substantial barrier, especially when outside organizations attempt to engage local people. And critically, messages that are not perceived as relevant to the local context, to their daily lives and concerns, tend to fall flat. These are the tangible barriers we must navigate. Now, let us move beyond these tangible barriers to discuss the deeply influential psychological and sociological aspects of communication in rural settings. These are the human elements: how people think, feel, interact, and make decisions within their specific rural social context. Why is this important, dear learners? Well, appreciating these aspects is absolutely key to crafting messages that don't just reach ears but truly connect with hearts and minds. Firstly, let us consider social structure and networks. Rural communities are typically close knit and structured, often characterized by strong extended family ties, clearly defined roles, and influential community leaders. How does information flow in such settings? Well, predominantly through interpersonal networks. Word of mouth is incredibly powerful, where many people know each other personally. Sociologists have long noted the pivotal role of opinion leaders in these networks. These are respected individuals, perhaps progressive farmers, dedicated teachers, religious figures, or village elders, whom others naturally turn to for advice and interpretation of new information. Development communication research consistently shows that involving such local influencers can significantly boost the uptake of new ideas. For instance, opinion leaders can help interpret media messages and put them into a local context for their peers. A compelling case from rural Nigeria saw community opinion leaders successfully encouraging COVID 19 vaccination by explaining its benefits and addressing doubts through personal conversations, thereby reinforcing official messages and building trust. This illustrates a broader principle. Rural communication often relies on face to face relational interaction, where trust and social bonds matter far more than mass media polish. Understanding the social fabric, kinship, caste, community groups is vital to map these networks and leverage them credibly. Next, on an individual level, we encounter psychological factors and perceptions. Rural audiences, like any other, possess cognitive and emotional filters that shape how they receive messages. A cornerstone here is trust. People are naturally more receptive to information from sources they trust and that align with their existing worldview. Another factor is the attitude towards change or outsiders. Some rural communities may hold a conservative outlook, deeply valuing tradition and being wary of new practices, especially those perceived as imposed from outside. This can manifest as psychological resistance. Imagine a farmer whose family has cultivated the same crop for generations. A message urging a switch to a new crop challenges not just a technique but a deeply ingrained way of life. Risk perception also plays a critical role. Rural households with precarious livelihoods tend to be risk averse. An innovation, be it a new farming method or health advice, might be perceived as carrying unacceptable risk. If communication doesn't acknowledge these fears with empathy, it may be ignored. Then there's motivation and relevance, a message that taps into what people intrinsically care about. The well being of their children, community pride will be far more motivating. For example, a sanitation campaign succeeded by framing toilet building not just as a health necessity but as a matter of community dignity and safety for women. We must also consider cognitive load. Complex instructions or an overload of information can overwhelm audiences, especially those with limited formal education. Psychologically, people remember and act on simple, clear messages that connect to their existing knowledge. This is where principles of effective communication psychology become so pertinent, using storytelling, repetition, and emotional appeal. Isn't a story of a local farmer's success with an innovation more persuasive than a dry list of scientific facts? Stories create emotional identification and are easier to recall. Don't you agree with me, dear learners? Sociologically, rural life is often collective, leading us to community norms and participation. Decisions might not be made by individuals in isolation but in group settings. Think of councils of elders, farmers' cooperatives, or women's self help groups. There is frequently a strong norm of not deviating too far from what the community as a whole finds acceptable. What does this mean for communication? If you aim to change behavior, say promote girls' education or discourage early marriage, You might face social pressure against individuals who try to act differently. Therefore, communication interventions must consider these norms and ideally work to shift the norm itself by engaging the entire community. A classic example is participatory rural appraisal or community theatre, where villagers collectively discuss issues and even create folk dramas about them. This group process can slowly change what is considered normal or acceptable as people collectively re-evaluate their beliefs. The psychology of influence also suggests that people in rural areas often observe what others are doing before adopting something new, a concept from the diffusion of innovation theory. Successful early adopters in a village become demonstration models, swaying others. Thus, strategies like demonstration plots, pilot projects with local families, and peer testimonials are effective because they leverage the sociological reality that seeing a neighbor succeed is more convincing than an abstract message. Finally, under the psychological and sociological umbrella, we have trust, identity, and empowerment. Psychologically, communication is also profoundly about identity and respect. Rural communities often possess a strong sense of identity tied to their land, heritage, or tribe. If messages seem to belittle this identity or are delivered in a patronizing tone, people will understandably disengage. Conversely, approaches that respect local knowledge and genuinely listen to local voices can empower communities, fostering ownership of the communication process. Participatory communication, which we will discuss more, isn't just a methodology. It has a psychological impact, making people feel valued and heard, thereby increasing their openness to new information. For sensitive topics like HIV, AIDS, psychological barriers such as stigma or fear of ostracization can hinder open communication. Here, social support mechanisms ensuring confidentiality and using culturally appropriate messaging become crucial. Another key psychological concept is self efficacy. People's belief in their ability to act on information. It's not enough to tell people what to do, they need to believe they can do it. Training, encouragement, and incremental steps help boost this confidence. For instance, a digital literacy program for rural women might start with a very basic phone skills, celebrating small successes, and gradually empowering participants to use technology more broadly. As seen in initiatives training daycare workers in rural India to use smartphone apps. So, to briefly recap these crucial human dimensions, we can say that effective rural communication requires both psychological insight, meaning empathy and understanding perceptions and motivations, and sociological insight, which involves leveraging social networks, norms, and leadership structures. A message delivered with cultural sensitivity through trusted community channels and crafted to resonate with local values and emotions stands a much better chance of achieving its purpose. We have seen that understanding social structures help us identify key influencers. Addressing individual psychological factors like trust and risk perception is vital. Recognizing community norms guides us to engage the collective, and fostering empowerment through respectful dialogue builds lasting impact. Are these elements always easy to integrate? No, not necessarily, but their importance cannot be overstated. Theory is vital, but practice brings it to life. Let us now ground our understanding by examining several real world examples and case studies from India. These highlight common rural communication gaps and, more importantly, successful interventions to overcome them. India's vast rural population and incredible diversity have been fertile ground for numerous innovative communication efforts, particularly in agriculture, health, and community development. These cases will illustrate the principles we have discussed. Our first case is Digital Green, an initiative focusing on participatory videos for farmers. The challenge was clear. Traditional agricultural extension services in India often struggled. Government agents would demonstrate techniques or give lectures, but adoption rates remained stubbornly low. Why? Well, because farmers often found the advice hard to relate to their specific conditions or lacked trust in these outsider experts. The intervention by Digital Green starting in the late 2000s was radically different. They trained farmers to make and watch participatory videos that featured themselves and their peers. Imagine a local farmer successfully implementing a new sowing method captured on video. These videos in the local language and starring community members are then shown to groups of farmers in the village using simple battery powered projectors. Well, the outcome? Impressive. Evaluations showed that villagers using the digital green approach saw the adoption of certain farm practices increase sevenfold compared to villagers using traditional methods. It was also found to be 10 times more cost effective per adoption. The success is attributed to social dynamics. Farmers are motivated by seeing their peers on screen and by the principle of homophily, learning better from someone they perceive as similar. This case brilliantly underscores how local content, peer learning, and appropriately mediated technology can overcome barriers of relevance, trust, and even literacy, as videos don't require reading. Don't you agree, dear learners? Our second case study is the ASHA program, aimed at bridging health communication gaps. The challenge here was that critical health information and services were often not reaching rural women and marginalized groups. Government programs for maternal and child health or family planning faltered because rural women were either unaware of their entitlements or did not trust the public health system. Cultural norms sometimes kept women secluded or required family permission to seek care. The intervention, launched nationally in 2005, was the creation of a new cadre of community level health communicators, the accredited social health activists or ASHAs. These are local village women trained in basic healthcare and health education. Each ASHA is responsible for a small population and acts as a vital liaison between the community and the public health system. Because she is from the community, she speaks the local dialect, understands the cultural context, and is trusted by her neighbors. Ashas go door to door, educate families, mobilize people for health services, and importantly, listen to community feedback. The outcome has been widely recognized. The ASHA program is credited with significantly improving health indicators like institutional delivery rates and immunization coverage in rural India. ASHAs have helped change behaviors by raising awareness and promoting healthy practices at the grassroots. One key success factor is that ASHA effectively overcame the trust barrier. Villagers see them as one of us. They also overcome literacy barriers through interpersonal communication, perhaps using visual flip charts or simple songs. This case demonstrates the power of using trusted intermediaries from within the community. So, learners, what are the key lessons that we can draw from these Indian case studies? Well, the answer is that Digital Green highlights the immense power of peer to peer learning, the resonance of locally created content, and the effective use of appropriate technology. The ASHA program, on the other hand, underscores the critical importance of trusted, community based intermediaries and the impact of culturally sensitive interpersonal communication. The common threads running through these successes are clear. They both employed participatory, audience centered approaches. They demonstrate that rural communication is not a one size fits all endeavor. Success often comes from tailoring the method to the community's specific context and crucially involving the community in the process. These examples truly bring to life the strategies we are about to discuss. Given the challenges we have identified and the lessons from successful interventions, what strategies can practitioners employ to overcome these barriers and improve communication effectiveness in rural settings? Well, think, learners. Okay, so we will now discuss several proven strategies and methods. A common thread you will notice is the shift towards audience centric and participatory approaches, moving away from simply top down dissemination of information to more inclusive and engaging forms of communication. First and foremost is the use of local language and clear messaging. This might seem obvious, but its importance cannot be overstated. Language localization is paramount. All communication materials, whether spoken, written, or audiovisual, should be provided in the local language or dialect of the target community. This is not just about direct translation. It is about adopting idioms and examples to fit local speech patterns. Beyond language, it is about using plain, clear language that matches the literacy level of the audience. For example, instead of a complex phrase like ensure optimal sanitization of your domestic water supply, a far more effective message would be boil drinking water for 10 minutes to kill germs. Simplicity and clarity are key to avoiding misunderstandings. Visual aids like pictorial posters or infographics with minimal text can powerfully complement spoken or written content, conveying meaning without heavy reliance on reading. The goal is to minimize linguistic and cognitive hurdles, ensuring that the intended message accurately equals the perceived message, with little lost in translation or jargons. Next, how do we address the pervasive issues of trust and credibility? The strategy here is building trust through community involvement and intermediaries. This involves identifying and empowering trusted intermediaries within the community. These could be formal roles like the ASHA health workers we discussed earlier, agricultural extension volunteers, or school teachers, but also informal influencers such as respected elders, religious leaders, or successful local entrepreneurs. The approach is twofold. First, involve these influential individuals in the planning and delivery of communication. Second, leverage their established networks to champion the message. For example, before rolling out a new program, holding briefing sessions with village elders to get their buy in can be invaluable. Once they understand and support the initiative, they become credible messengers to their own community. Another powerful aspect is co creation. When community members help design a poster or compose a song about a topic, they are far more likely to trust and value it. Co creation ensures content reflects local values and fosters a sense of ownership. Trust also builds over time through consistent presence and active listening. Regular community meetings and responding to feedback shows that communication is a two-way street. Our third strategy focuses on culturally sensitive and relevant content. Crafting messages that align with local culture and context is absolutely core to effective communication. This begins with researching and respecting local customs, traditions, beliefs, and social norms before designing any communication. Whenever possible, frame the content in a way that integrates local cultural references or worldviews. For instance, the Swachh Bharat or Clean India rural sanitation campaign effectively tapped into cultural concepts of purity and honor, linking having a toilet to protecting the dignity or izzat of women. a value that resonates deeply in Indian villages. This cultural framing was often more persuasive than purely scientific arguments. It is also crucial to acknowledge existing cultural constructs openly. If there's a prevalent belief related to your topic, even if it is a misconception, don't dismiss it outright. Instead, address it respectfully. Using local proverbs, metaphors, and stories can also make content highly relatable. In essence, cultural adaptation involves both content and delivery style, ensuring the message engages local pride and identity rather than causing offense or alienation. Learners, as we have pointed out at several times, participation is a keystone. Our fourth strategy is participatory communication methods. This means moving beyond simply broadcasting information to actively facilitating dialogue, interaction, and local input. But what does this look like in practice? Several methods can be employed: community meetings and dialogues that encourage collective problem solving, interactive workshops and role plays like farmers' field schools or health workshops using skits, leveraging folk media and community theatre, especially when community members are involved in the creation and performance, supporting community media such as a local radio station run by youth or participatory video projects like Digital Green, and critically establishing clear feedback mechanisms, allowing the audience to respond and see that their input can lead to action. The overarching idea is that participation increases the sense of ownership of the information and the changes it seeks. People feel this is our project, our message, rather than something imposed. It also surfaces valuable local knowledge and builds local capacity. While these methods can be time consuming, the payoff in sustainability and impact is generally very high. Dear learners, before we wind up, let us quickly recap these foundational strategies. We have emphasized the critical need for local language and clear messaging to ensure better standing. We have seen how building trust through community involvement and intermediaries creates credibility and a sense of ownership. The importance of culturally sensitive and relevant content cannot be overstated for ensuring that messages resonate and are respected. And finally, participatory methods empower communities and lead to more sustainable outcomes. These strategies form the bedrock upon which more specific tools and outreach efforts can be built. Are there other tools we can employ, especially leveraging modern advancements? Do think about it, learners. Absolutely, we can. So, dear learners, that's all for today, but the conversation doesn't end here. In our next lecture, we'll explore the future of rural communication and what is possible with emerging technologies. I look forward to diving deeper into this subject with you next time. Till we meet again, happy learning and keep up the good faith.